Welcome to the Inspiring You Show. If we've ever met, I'm Henry. This episode is about overgiving and under receiving, the hidden costs of imbalanced exchange, what it is, why it hurts, and how it affects your life. So, first off, though, let's just take a moment to arrive. Let's take a nice breath. Take another breath. Let yourself settle into this moment. Let your body soften a little. Let yourself arrive without needing to perform, prepare, or push. Okay. So, today we're talking about a pattern that many people live inside without fully naming it: overgiving and under receiving. This pattern, which may have been beneficial at one point, may have become outdated or non beneficial and can possibly affect your work, your relationships, your energy, your sense of worth, your prosperity, even the way your nervous system learns what is normal. And often it does not look obvious at first. Sometimes it looks like kindness. Sometimes it looks like being generous. Sometimes it looks like being dependable, caring, flexible, patient, or helpful. But underneath those qualities, there can sometimes be a deeper imbalance, a pattern where you are consistently giving more than you are receiving, offering more than is sustainable, carrying more than is mutual, extending more than is being returned. And over time, that imbalance can create depletion, confusion, burnout, grief, hurt, sadness, disappointment, a quiet sense that something in your life is not truly meeting you. And even at times, resentment can build when you begin to realize how little others may actually be giving back within the relationship. And in some cases, the other person may be in kind of an amnesia, illusion, or unconsciousness around their own behavior. They may not fully realize how much they are taking, how much space they're occupying, or how much the relationship has come to rely on your giving. But even if it is not fully conscious on their part, it can still feel like the dynamic is pulling more and more out of you while giving very little back in return. And even when it is not fully intentional, this dynamic of constantly being the one who is giving and giving and giving, and the other is always receiving, receiving, can become like a vacuum, steadily pulling more and more from you while offering very little in return. And that can just feel exhausting, depleting, and so many other things. And so sometimes, once a person also has received what they need from you, you may barely hear from them again until the next time they need support, help, reassurance, care, or energy. And that can also be deeply painful. Over time, this can condition you into a role where you are always there when the other person is in need, crisis, overwhelmed, or seeking something from you. But when they are okay again, when their need has been met, they may not call, check in, reciprocate, or remain meaningfully present in your life. And that kind of pattern can be very hard to unravel, especially if it's been normalized over many years. And with this, at times, it can be really easy to blame yourself when this happens, or even being caught in, blaming others. And the guides show that it's not about blame. It's about being able to recognize. But that does not mean that you're not going to process any pain, sadness, hurt, or trauma. Yet the guides do share that this is not about blame. It's about being able to recognize that at one time, this way of being may have been beneficial, yet now it's being called to be cleared and shifted. And, you know, it could have been beneficial maybe at one point when you were younger, if you're somebody who's highly sensitive, that this could have brought in more awareness about energy fields or how certain like frequencies feel or emotions feel, and how then you were then being raised in awareness of like, oh, something's happening in the field, and you were then getting, used to different energy fields. And so it may have been very beneficial at one point in terms of training the human, yet it could have become then non-beneficial or outdated at some point, yet it still was running in your system. And with this, often there can be a non beneficial survival signal in the field that has been unconsciously broadcasting then availability, overfunctioning, rescue, or repeated access. And others then may be responding to that non beneficial survival signal without fully realizing how imbalanced the exchange has become. Again, they may not consciously understand what they are doing, yet they're still participating in a pattern that takes far more than it gives. And so that's where then understanding how the field really works, your personal field as well as the external field. And then within your field, understanding how, in terms of your signal, you could have a non beneficial survival signal that is then, being sent out there. And it's then your actual soul signal is not being as read by the external field because that survival signal is much more prominent. And that's why, too, understanding how different aspects of energy really works can really support you. So, with this, then, again, they may not consciously understand what they're doing, yet they are still participating in a pattern that takes far more than it gives. And even when the dynamic is unconscious, it can still hurt. It can still feel painful to realize that a relationship has become organized around your giving, your availability, or your care, while very little mutuality comes back in return. And I cannot say this enough, conscious or not, it just can be really painful to live inside a relationship where giving is not mutual, or it just seems like it's one-sided and one person is like 24/7 on call for others, and it can feel very draining, and it just can feel really exhausting. And when you do, in dosing energy, before we do the energy clearing and recalibration, there is an investigative work that is, that's done. And when you do investigative work in dosing energy, you have the opportunity to discover that there just may be a non beneficial survival signal in the field that has been, unconsciously broadcasting over availability, rescue, or repeated access. So once you're in recognition of this, then you can work to clear, shift, and recalibrate, and then work with the human to create new ways of being that are more balanced and healthy for everyone and not just one side of the party. And so I have found, until the energy is cleared, shifted, and recalibrated, it can be really difficult and challenging and hard to stick new habits onto the human when these energy patterns pull the human into, activity in terms of doing without even realizing it at first, because the energy of the pattern is so strong and running. It's kind of like a puppet where you're being marionetted by the energy pattern, and you may be like, wow, what is happening? And then you're in a process of doing something and you can kind of see it, but you can't pull yourself back fully because the energy of the pattern is marionetting you or puppeting you, into something, because it has been a energetic pattern that's been like embodied over a course of time. And so when you balance though the giving and the receiving, it doesn't mean then you still won't enjoy giving, but you'll be in a more balanced way to let yourself enjoy receiving as well. And you won't feel so drained because there is more of a balance and you won't be working just from a deficit. So, in the guides define, let's just talk about the definition. So the guides define overgiving and underreceiving as more than a behavior. They show it as a pattern of exchange. It is a pattern in which a person becomes more accustomed to giving than receiving, more available to others than to themselves, more practiced at extending energy outward than allowing support to come back in. And I'll just also say, again, it's not right, wrong, good or bad. It's the business of isness. And this could have been beneficial at one point in terms of, learning different aspects here on earth. And it could have something to do in terms of your sole purpose with your human of, like why this showed up when it showed up, maybe as a child where you learned this and it supported you for just different things that you needed to understand about energy or what it was, where you were going to go in terms of your own path. And then it could have become outdated or non-beneficial, but the system hadn't been updated, which to me is why energy work is just so important in terms of the clearing, the shifting, the recalibrating, and then working with the human in terms of any habits then do need to be brought in. So with then in looking at the definition from the guides, overgiving happens when your giving exceeds what is balanced, sustainable, truthful, or mutual. And when we're talking about truthful, we're talking about light truth. And so under receiving happens when what comes back to you is too little, inconsistent, withheld, or not fully allowed in by your own system. Because that is another thing too, where you may want to receive, but there might be blocks to your receiving because your system isn't allowing it. Your nervous system may not be used to actually receiving. There might be some sort of defense mode or mechanism that is actually blocking you from receiving. There might be some sort of something happening in the nervous system. And so then with this, then sometimes so under receiving happens when what comes back to you is too little, inconsistent, withheld, or not fully allowed in by your system. And then sometimes these two happen together so often that they begin to feel normal in terms of overgiving and under receiving. So a person may not even realize how imbalanced things have become because they've spent so much, they spent so long being the one who gives, helps, understand, adjusts, initiates, or carries. And so the overgiving and under receiving, these two things happen together because they've been so normalized in your everyday. And overgiving is not simply generosity. Generosity is clean when it comes from willingness, fullness, clarity, and choice. Overgiving is different. Overgiving often comes from pressure. It may come from guilt. It may come from, fear of disappointing others. It may come from the need to be needed. It may come from identity. It may come from habit. It may come from wanting to preserve peace, connection, approval, or belonging. And I'll also say that if you are somebody who's highly sensitive, who has intuitive abilities in terms of being able to read fields and feel things where you can feel, oh, you walk into a coffee shop and you can feel that somebody in the corner is in a space of processing sadness. And then all of a sudden you feel pulled to, is there something I can do, something to help? Because you feel what the level of the energy of that sadness. And and so as when you first were learning, whenever it activated, it could have been beneficial because it was allowing you to become more aware of, not just your field, but other people's field and how we live in a collective space. And it also could have been teaching you how to differentiate between different frequencies. Sadness can feel different than depression, which then can feel different, obviously, from joy or peace or, other things. And so it was fine tuning your sense of sensitivity in regard to the different frequencies that are, happening on earth. And so that could have been like a master teaching, PhD program that you were going through in somewhat like on the fly where you were in different spaces. And as you were inhabiting the space, you were feeling what's going on and you were reading the different things going on. So that way you could understand how it really happens and works to support you in terms of then allowing you to become more aware and then allowing you to become even more like soul embodied, because the more that you can expand your consciousness, the more then obviously then can clear in terms of non-beneficial density in the human, which allows more light to fill in the spaces, your soul light, which then allows you to expand in your consciousness in terms of light consciousness. So it could have been helping you in terms of your evolution with your soul human interface. That being said, though, once you really understood different aspects, there may have come a point where then you were complete with it, but the pattern stayed running, and it could have been staying running then because there was different beliefs connected to it. And some of the beliefs could actually be, from different places. It could also there could be some religious beliefs with it. It's better to give than to receive. I grew up Catholic and I went to Catholic school for 12 years, and that was definitely one that was really strong. And because I was highly sensitive and as a child in terms of my own experience, that then coupled with it, which then really, was really challenging for me because then I was constantly over giving, especially if you can feel if you can feel like, you walk into a space and you can feel like sadness, disappointment, or, what people are going through and you're being pulled in different directions, that can really then, if you add on to it's better to give than receive, you're then, trying to basically put the oxygen mask on everyone else before you put it on yourself and then others. And so that's something with me with energy work has really supported me to clear and then having more healthy boundaries for myself and others. And learning to put on the oxygen mask first and then on others. So with that, then with overgiving, it's not just, overgiving. It's not just I gave a lot. It's more like I gave past my own capacity. I gave without checking in with myself. So I gave because I felt I had to. I gave because not giving felt unsafe. And that could be something where you're giving because it's something that was really programmed into the human, and then all of a sudden I gave because not giving felt unsafe, and that's where it connects to the nervous system. Or I gave because I did not know how to stop. And especially if you're somebody again who's highly sensitive, or if you relate to being like an intuitive empath and you just feel the flow of energy in the spaces, and that can really be challenging because discerning between your field and another field as you're feeling so much. And that's why understanding how energy works and having tools is so beneficial. Another thing could be where, you could have been, I gave because I thought it was my role. So again, overgiving is not just I gave a lot. It is a lot more, and it can come in different ways. And so the guides then are very clear with this, with that overgiving can be emotional, practical, financial, energetic, relational, mental, physical, or even spiritual. It may look like being the one who always reaches out, being the one who always listens, being the one who always adapts, being the one who always, does more at work, being the one who always makes things easier for everyone else, being the one who carries emotional labor that is not truly mutual, being the one who keeps giving even when depleted. And so I'll say too, with like overgiving, it's really interesting because, when you then start to, learn to ask for, you know, what it is that you are needing in relationships, it can feel really challenging at time because one, you don't have the muscle memory, you're not used to it, and also because the other person that you may be in a relationship with, they're not used to you asking, and they're used to the relationship being possibly one-sided, which can be really painful. And two, if you are somebody who is like an intuitive empath or highly sensitive and has the capacity to hold space for people in regard to holding compassion space, it does not mean that everyone else understands how to do that, or is ready for the relationship to change, which can also be challenging. And sometimes too, if you do feel frequencies and energy, you can tell, you can feel it if somebody is in a false sense of compassion or empathy, where say if you've been the one that somebody always calls when they're in, dire need of some sort of, having somebody listen or offer compassion. And then when you present to them something you're going through, and they go into kind of like a performative aspect of compassion, where you can tell it's a false sense of compassion and empathy and sympathy, where it's like, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that. And you immediately may feel like, oh, that's fake. And that makes me feel yucky even more. And you might even feel even more alone because it doesn't feel good. And then if it's a long time relationship, you're processing then the loss and grief and in regard to so many other things. But with that, then just using energy tools to recognize, and then also remember it's not right, good or bad. It's the business of an business, and people can be in performative aspects of different things and not even realize. They may not even be conscious that they're in a false way of compassion. They may be thinking that they're being compassionate and checking off a box like, this is what compassion looks like, but it's actually a false sense of compassion. They're being performative of it. And you have to recognize that, if you are somebody who can feel energy and frequencies, vibrations, that you're getting the information that is underneath, that is the light truth of it. And this other person doesn't even realize that they're being fake, that they think that they're actually offering something that is really not really in resonance. They're just checking off the box. And so then you can then reassess, your relationships. And it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that you have to, let go of relationships. You just bring in more compassion for yourself and others and realize that everyone's in different trajectories, possibly. And everyone's in different spaces with their own relationship with waking up and awareness and consciousness. And on earth, we've just been in this, mirror experience where people have adapted for various reasons, and they may have adapted tones of compassion from another, like, this is what you do, or they've watched TV shows or movies, or, or in life and school and family life, where they saw people modeling certain behaviors. Like, if somebody is sad, this is how you act. And they don't may not even know that they're going into a performative aspect. It might be just a light switch of unconsciousness that's going on, that they're just going into the role. And so that's where you just understand, like, okay, this is the consciousness of it. And doesn't mean though you don't have loss and grief, sadness. You're just using the applied wisdom from your experiences. And then once you've processed the emotions, and if you do energy work, dousing energy work to clear any non-beneficial energies, frequencies from you, and then if you receive the free will to be able to clear numbers cords between you and the other person, and allowing yourself to have then, healthy relationships. And again, you then can call in, healthy, balanced relationships that really support you where you are now and where you're growing, how it can meet you. And then also, your current relationships, asking if there can be any, like, transformative aspects for the highest good for you, the other person, the relationship. And you can still continue having relationships. You just let go of any kind of non-beneficial expectations. And then also, just because you had showed up for somebody in a certain way, it doesn't mean that they have the capacity to show up for you in that way. They also might not have the emotional maturity on it. And so that's where then, you're utilizing mindfulness tools, where you're just allowing, wherever you are, to use those tools. And then allowing yourself, though, also to have and be able to receive what you need, whether it is in maybe a old relationship you had, or calling in relationships that will support you from where you are now and allowing you to grow, and vice versa with the other person. Okay, so with overgiving, then overgiving again is not just like I gave a lot. It's more like I gave past my own capacity, right? I gave without checking in with myself. I gave because I felt I had to. I gave because, again, not giving felt unsafe. I gave because I did not know how to stop. I gave because I thought it was my role. So it's really, I am repeating these because it is really important to understand. And sometimes when you first hear it, you may be like, oh, but then we go into an explanation and bringing it back around. It just really allows the light information to come in forward even more. And the guides, again, are very clear that overgiving can be different aspects: emotional, practical, financial, energy, physical. Or it can be really challenging in a lot of ways. But the more that you understand this, the more capacity for your consciousness to then support you in clearing anything that's non-beneficial and calling in things like having more balanced, healthy relationship with self and others. Um, and so then, you know, with that, that's the overgiving. And overgiving is, just to name them again, it can be being the one who always reaches out, being the one who always listens, being the one who always adapts, being the one who always does more work, being the one who always makes things easier for everyone, being the one who carries emotional labor that is not truly mutual, being the one who always, keeps giving even when depleted, which then could create burnout, exhaustion, tiredness. So take some time with these too, to let yourself process, and even if you have to pause this, let yourself pause it, journal it, check in to see. Don't just let this podcast episode be like me just talking in your ear as you walk, or if you're doing whatever you're doing. Take some time with it to process it and journal, use your tools. So now, what is under receiving? Under receiving is not only about not getting enough money, it's so much broader than that. Under receiving means that under receiving can mean not receiving enough support, care, reciprocal nature and relationships of giving and receiving, or even under receiving can mean not receiving enough acknowledgement, rest, nourishment, respect, compensation, tenderness, effort, or follow through. It can also mean that even when something is offered, the system does not fully know how to allow it in. So, under receiving has both an outer and inner dimension. So, under receiving has it's within your personal energy field, and then also there's an aspect of how the external field is relating to your under receiving. So the external field or the outer dimension is when life, work, or relationships are not giving back in a balanced way. The inner, your inner field or inner dimension, however you want to say it, is when the body and the nervous system are not yet fully available to receive what is supportive, fear, or nourishing. And the guides show that many people who overgive do not only live in outer imbalance, they also live with an inner receiving block. They may long for support, but feel uncomfortable asking. They may want reciprocal, actions in terms of giving, receiving in relationships, but feel guilty expecting it. They may want rest, but struggle to allow it. They may want fair exchange, but feel uneasy naming their worth. And also, too, if you're longing for support, but feel uncomfortable asking, that's then you having to work through, maybe there's trauma, or maybe there's other things that you're not used to the muscle aspect of asking. So you have to work through any kind of anxiety that you feel. You might just be really out of practice in some ways of asking. And so that's where looking at your chakras too, like looking at your throat chakra. Is there any blocks to you being able to ask and voice for your needs? And then working with any kind of anxiety or uncomfortable feelings that come up and strengthening your ability to ask and strengthening your muscle ability to be able to let yourself ask for support and receive it. And that's why working with the multidimensional bodies is so important because it's not just one thing, it's multidimensional. And so then why this pattern forms. So Oversoul Sahariel shows that this pattern can often begin for a lot of different reasons, but there can also be adaptation. So it can come through, it may form through family conditioning, religious conditioning, which is it could be better to give than receive, cultural conditioning, trauma, attachment dynamics, people pleasing, survival patterning. It can also, come in through, it could even be from like the patriarchy where, women were seen in a certain way. And so then that could have been handed down through the generations of, women act, X, Y, and Z, men act X, Y, and Z. And so it could have created, these different patterns that formed. There also could be workplace environments that reward overfunctioning. Many of you know that I worked in television for over 20 years, and I definitely had that. I had workplace environments that reward overfunctioning. I would there were days where I sometimes worked 14, 18-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week. And we were not, as producers in television and reality TV, we were not paid overtime. And there was definitely a reward of overfunctioning that you stay late, show up early, you go, 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 work, work, work. And, once you got on a show, it became your whole life. And it was like, that's how it operated. So then it really normalized this level of behavior, and it normalized also, you accepting a lot more in relationship to your work. And so we were definitely not paid, what we should have been paid, for the amount of work that we were doing. And then also, it may form through relationships that normalize imbalance. And it also may form, through and again, it could have been beneficial at one point where you were learning different skills in relationship to your intuitive abilities, but then it could have become like, could have helped you become more aware and awakened at certain times in your life, which that could have been beneficial. And then it could become non beneficial if it then patterned into a non beneficial habit with the human. So, with that, then at some point, the system may have learned that it's safer to give than to need. It's safer to be useful than vulnerable. It's safer to anticipate than to ask. It's safer to overfunction than to disappoint. And it's safer to carry more than to risk being rejected. So the pattern then makes sense. It does not, and also it does not come from weakness. It often comes from intelligence, sensitivity, adaptation, and a real attempt to stay connected or safe. But what once helped you cope may later become the very thing that keeps you depleted. Or, what once helped you waken up in terms of awareness of like, wow, that's what's really happening here, it then can become the very thing that keeps you depleted. And I'll also say too, sometimes, years ago, the term energy vampire was utilized a lot, and people talked about, oh, that person's like an energy vampire. And I understood the concept and I may even like had used it at a time, but it never really felt like that's it. It feels like, wait a minute, it takes two to be in relationship. So what is happening here that I may be also doing in terms of taking responsibility and accountability, which has kind of really led me, for me, I really had to understand how what was happening to support me having, healthy relationships with myself and others in terms of the energy aspects. And so the term energy vampire just never really fully resonated with me because it takes two to tango. And so then how can you have healthy boundaries in terms of your personal field so that maybe you're not getting so caught feeling vacuumed. Um, and how do you do that? Which really led me into being curious mode, where there's got to be a way that you can have, healthy boundaries in regard to personal energy fields or clearing shifts, recalibration, which really led me to, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm just doing this energy research and really understanding how it's really working and continuously being in curious mode, and asking, just different questions, and then trying, the different tools to support. And to me, dowsing energy work and Reiki has been two that have supported me again and again. Obviously, also just working with the guides and asking the guides. Um, but in terms of this, and then also with it, the guys will often say, it's not right, wrong, good or bad. It's the business of business. And within that business of business, it's really then letting yourself learn, grow, and evolve, and knowing that there can be a shift and recalibration. But the important thing about understanding overgiving and under receiving and the hidden cost of imbalance exchange is really how it can affect you. The hidden cost of overgiving and under receiving is significant. It can affect your energy. You may feel chronically drained, overextended, scattered, or fatigued. It can affect your emotions. You may feel resentment, sadness, loneliness, disappointment, numbness, you know, depression. There might be some trauma or even quiet anger that is hard to name. It can also affect your relationships. You may find yourself in a one sided dynamic where others expect a great deal from you while offering really little true reciprocal nature in the relationship in return for you. And I speak to that where I have had many experiences in my own life where it has been challenging at times, for me in the past, where I have had relationships that ended up being more one-sided, and when I truly needed something, you know, the person didn't have the capacity to be there, or they were unconscious, or they'd already received what they wanted to receive from me, so then they had no real interest in, showing up for me. And I had to really look at how I was having relationships and what was happening, to for me. And then from there, just, calling in healthy relationships, or even asking for recalibrations for my relationships in dowsing energy work, always respecting free will, not only your free will, but also, another's, and asking if that work can be done and working with the guides. So that has really helped me in a lot of different ways, because once you bring awareness to it and the recognition, which is what I talked about last episode, you then, once the self realization and you do the investigative dowsing work, then you can ask for that clearing because you've brought in the consciousness on it. And then from there, that's when the shifting and the capacity for recalibration can come in. And remember, there are things that are just amazing in terms of like miracles where, the energy can shift. You work with the guides, and things can really transform in terms of self and others, in terms of relationships. I've really seen it in my own work, and I've also seen it, within, doing private sessions. But with that though, not everybody may have an interest of wanting to do this type of work, or they may be really in their own satisfaction of like, I'm good where I am. I don't need to, I don't need to like have self-awareness or look at what my actions possibly are or take any responsibility. And that's completely okay. There's no, it's not right, wrong, good or bad. It's a business of business. But if you're wanting to have just more relationships that are more reciprocal and healthy, in a balance of giving and receiving, and then for there you can call in then relationships that would support you in that. Okay, so this can also affect your work. You may overperform, overdeliver, undercharge, underask, or accept less compensation than your labor deserves, which again, when I was working in television, that was definitely the case. I had no idea until I got out of TV, and then the illusion cleared, and I looked back at my work life, and I cannot believe how much I overworked. How much and in some ways it can feel like you're in this like servitude that you are a slave to the system and you're just like being pounded on where you're being owned by, this system of work. I mean, that's what it really felt like when I look back at TV, how I didn't even have like ownership of my own life because once I got on a show, it's like the show owned you. And yes, I love television a lot of ways and it was a dream job, but I didn't know, I had a naivete that I didn't really understand how these systems worked and how then you can get caught in them, and then all of a sudden you're in this overworking situation and you're undercharging, you're under asking, and you're accepting way less compensation than your labor actually deserves. So then with this can affect your prosperity, your abundance, your financial flow. You may keep pouring value outward while receiving far less money, support, visibility, or replenishment that is truly aligned. It can affect your nervous system. Your body may become accustomed to vigilance, anticipation, self overriding, and the ongoing exertion of caring too much. It can also affect your identity. You may unconsciously begin to equate worth with usefulness, goodness with sacrifice, and love with self abandonment. So that's why you also have to look at how you're defining your relationship with love or your relationship with usefulness or your relationship even with goodness. Like sometimes, some people may have like the good girl or the good boy, and then this is how you're supposed to act X, Y, and Z, which then can go into, collective expectation and patterns that you have to clear from, or, even things from the lineages, or maybe even from like religion. I definitely had a component. There's a book I read years ago that talks about like the good girl. And when I was reading the book, I was like, oh my goodness, I definitely have these things I need to clear. And, you know, and some of it came from me, going to Catholic school for 12 years and just hearing things repeated again and again and again. It can really then, imprint, and an imprinting, can be neutral, but it can then be beneficial or non-beneficial, right? Where you think about like, Play-Doh or even silly putty where you can imprint into something. Well, it can become non-beneficial if you hear things again and again and again, and then that can act like a trigger for the human that you're supposed to act X, Y, and Z. And then next thing you know, you're overgiving and under receiving, and you then are in this pattern that might feel like lifelong, and you feel like you're caught in it, and you're like, how do I get out of it? And the energy is just so incredibly strong, and it's affecting you in just various ways. That is for me how I call it going around the mulberry bush. And I years ago when I was in my 20s and I started working with an energy practitioner, understanding energy and how it works, and then into my it was really got into it more into my 30s actually. Um, I would say like, God, I feel like I'm just going around the mulberry bush. How do I learn these lessons? But it wasn't about just the lessons per se. It wasn't like this uh, eh, the discovery is part of it. The self-realization is part of it. But if you don't clear the energy, you're just you're going to be stuck in this looping. And then I would feel like I'm going around the mulberry bush where I had an experience happen and I learned and the mulberry bush got a bit smaller, but then next thing you know, a similar lesson would come up, and next thing you know, I'm looping around the mulberry bush again, and I just felt like I was caught in this groundhog's day, and like, how do I get out of this groundhog's day? I can see it clearly, but I was caught in these like these kind of like energy webs. How do I get clear from these energy webs and shift and recalibrate? And so that's really led me to, just really diving in deep and asking the guys a lot of questions, and it feels like in some ways I've just been doing my own version. I've taken tons of classes. I've worked with tons of teachers. I have tons of certifications. And in asking the guides, I just feel like I've gone through this, PhD, this level of energy mastery program to understand, or kind of like going through, an equivalent of medical school to understand how the workings of energy work in relationship to the human, the soul, etc. And a lot of it has come from, yes, open curiosity mind, but a lot of it has also really come from my own experiences of how do I get out of this? There has to be a way, and how to problem solve it, because I'd feel stuck sometimes. I would feel depleted. I just wouldn't, feel good. And I've read just a ton of books on, being an empath, and some of it just didn't resonate, where I'm like, what? You have to then just accept some of these experiences and not be able to go and enjoy X, Y, and Z because you're so highly sensitive. Like that just didn't resonate with me. I'm like, there has to be a way to have healthy boundaries with yourself and in the world that you're living in. And so, I've just done a lot of different things. And for me, again, I use a lot of tools, and Reiki and dowsing has been the tools that have helped me like the most in terms of like working with energy and being so highly sensitive in the world. Okay, it can affect, as I mentioned, things that it can affect. It can affect your identity. Again, you may unconsciously begin to equate worth with usefulness, as well as goodness with sacrifice. And I just want to talk about that sacrifice, which is why I'm repeating it again. The sacrifice part, people can then get into self-sacrifice with this, which then you can get into non-beneficial victim aspects, where you're in non-beneficial victim patterning. And that can be really challenging, because you may be in a non-beneficial victim patterning, where then you're always relating through the lens that you're always the victim, and not even realizing that at times that it's then creating a lack with you in the world. Because if you're in non-beneficial victim, then everything's always happening to you, and then the external field may be reading that as well, because that's essentially the vibration, the vibrational frequency that you're putting out there, and that's the non-beneficial survival signal. And so that part of it's really important to clear too. Non-beneficial victim patterning, or even if you're, or the other end of it, where somebody could be on the other side of it, in terms of like non-beneficial aspects of, whatever else needs to get cleared with it. And some of that could be poverty mindset too. You could be in a poverty mindset with non-beneficial victim patterning. Um, and then also then clearing out the overgiving and under receiving. They can be layered within all of this, which is why the dowsing is so important, or however you do it. Investigative work is so important, because you are following the threads, and you can find one thread, and that thread could lead you to many others that need to be cleared. And I kind of look at it like it could be like if you've seen like a ball filled with elastics, how there's elastics one on top of another. It could be like pulling off one elastic, then finding the other one, pulling off the other one, until all the elastics are, free of each other. And then that's, you can have the clearing, and then allowing the light to come in to fill in the spaces. Also, this can then affect your sense of like what is normal. You may normalize being the one who gives more, understands more, tolerates more, and asks for less. And that could also be muscle memory, that you're so used to doing it. I was so used to doing it. I then had to catch myself before I just offered. I mean, it was so embedded in me. And then I would say like, "Oh, I'll help and do X, Y, and Z." And then afterwards be like, "Wait, what just happened?" And it's because these patterns can be so embedded that you just unconsciously say it because the pattern gets turned on like a light switch and you are being puppeted by the pattern. And then after you walk away, once you're out of, someone else's energy field or the situation, you may then wake up being like, "Wait, what did I just do? Oh no." And it's because that pattern was activated from whatever scenario you were in. And then, perhaps most painfully, though, these experiences can make you feel unseen in the very places where you are most needed. And so, even if you've helped and supported, you may still remain invisible where you are needed. And that can be really painful too, where, you've just supported X, Y, and Z, and then you're like discarded. And you're like, wait, what just happened? And that can just be really hurtful to the human. So that's why I give your human a lot of compassion if you are moving through this and clearing it. And then the hidden cost. Let's talk about the hidden cost. The guides name the hidden cost as this: when overgiving becomes normal, imbalance can begin to feel familiar. When under receiving becomes normal, deprivation can begin to feel deserved. When both happen together long enough, a person may begin to forget that mutuality is even possible. And so this is why the cost is hidden, because many people do not immediately recognize the pattern as harmful. They think they're being loving. They think that they're being strong. They think that they're being generous. They think that they are just doing what is needed. But underneath, there may be exhaustion. Underneath, there may be grief. Underneath, there may be the ache of never quite being met. Underneath, there may be a quiet sense that life is drawing from you more than it is nourishing you. And so that's the cost that's hidden underneath. And that's why it's like, really diving in to understand like what's really happening and what am I really doing, and becoming aware and going into self-realization, because then that can support you in terms of eventually clearing and shifting and recalibrating. And and then, not being in so much depletion or clearing from the depletion. Because this can also cause energy leaks in your field, because which then affects you in terms of possible prosperity, financial flow, abundance. Because if you're constantly overgiving and under receiving, it can cause then just these leaks in your energy field. Um, and two, this is why it's also important to understand like what is your definition of love? Because if many people don't recognize the pattern as harmful, they think that they're being loving. They think they're being generous. They think they're just doing what is needed. But then after you leave, you feel exhausted and you're like, wait, what just happened? Or you feel just really drained. And that's a sign like, wait a minute, did I just overgive and did I just under receive? And then how it shows up in relationships. In relationships, the pattern may look like the one who always initiates, always checks in, always listens, always offers compassion, always are the one to lend the ear, always forgives, always understands, always accommodates, or always carries the emotional field. Which, if you are somebody who's highly intuitive in terms of being an intuitive empath, highly sensitive, people can get really used to you always carrying the emotional field. And that can be in and itself exhausting. Exhausting. So it may also mean you're doing the deeper work while the other person benefits from your labor. It also may mean that people are used to your giving, your flexibility, your patience, your availability. And they're used to you being on call. There was a time where I was like, "Oh my god, I feel like I'm just on call 24/7," where it's like 24/7 for everybody's needs. But like then for me, I'm like, "Well, what about my needs?" And I realized that and then when I did ask, people were so used to me not ever asking. And that really became clear in like, oh, this is how I've been setting up the relationships, and how they were setting up was based on some of these patterns that I was in. Um, and because they're used to it, they may not even question how much they're receiving from you. Sometimes they are unconscious, sometimes they're also entitled. Sometimes they're entitled. And that can be really painful too, to realize that somebody feels like entitled, and they feel entitled to you being on call for them for 24/7, and they don't even realize, you know, what their behaviors are like, and then they don't realize that they may have repair work to do with you because they're entitled. They may just blame you for then asking for what you need in terms of healthy boundaries, because they're so conditioned to getting what they want and just constantly receiving from you, that they may then go into this entitlement aspect, which can be really uncomfortable and sad and hurtful in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're simply accustomed to the arrangement. I mean, and that's really where you have to understand this is not a black and white situation. There's a whole gray area. And the more that you can, mature your own emotional maturity and your mental capacity to understand, we're just in different levels of consciousness. It's not right, wrong, good, or bad. Being human, humaning is very complicated, amazing, but very complex at the same time. There can be two things happening at once. So, but whatever the reason, though, the result is the same. The exchange is not balanced. And you may want to, you may try to have conversations with people. It may go well, it may not go well. Some people may not have an interest in the relationship changing to become more balanced because they liked how it was. And so that's where, you have to decide on, what is it you want. And there are ways to use mindfulness tools in terms of relationships. Yet also too, if you have to do healthy boundaries, let yourself be in healthy boundaries as well. And two, if you feel like you're really rusty in terms of, trying to talk about it or have healthy boundaries, be kind to the human, because this might be the first time ever in your human life in this lifetime that you've actually asked for what you wanted and needed. And just because you asked for what you wanted and needed, it also doesn't mean though the other person is has the capacity to give or has the desire, depending on where they are in their life. And again, that's not right, wrong, good or bad. It's business. You just have to take care of yourself and process your emotions. And then you can then ask for healthier, balanced relationships. But let's talk about how it shows up in work and prosperity. So, in work, overgiving and underreceiving can look like doing more than your role requires, carrying more responsibility than you're paid for, giving enormous care and effort, and then receiving too little compensation, recognition, or support in return. It may look like being indispensable but underpaid, valuable but overlooked, relied upon but not properly resourced. It can also shape the way you think about money itself. You may feel more comfortable giving service than receiving payment. You may feel more comfortable helping than asking for fair value. You may feel more comfortable proving than receiving. And then prosperity becomes difficult, not because you do not have value, but because the pattern of exchange has become distorted. So there can also be certain words that may not resonate. And I will say that the word service, I feel, is often overused. And I really try to work on saying support, because service to me, in my human experience, feels like servitude. And it is because of having experience being in this pattern of overgiving and underreceiving, and in connection with the religious aspects of the word service, as well as with it's better to give than receive. That was so conditioned in our schooling in 12 years of Catholic school. So when I hear the word service, I like, ugh, it does not feel right, because there's still a charge that's clearing on it. And so I really work on then saying the word support, things like that. And, you know, eventually when it really clears, there'll be no charge on it. So I'll be able to say it, but it's like when you say certain things, notice what the words or how the response is in terms of your body. When I just said you may feel more comfortable giving service than receiving payment, the way that was said in relationship to this was okay. But if I were just to talk about like, "Oh, I wanna be of service," like, that does not resonate with me, and it makes me cringe because how much more of service do I need to be? How much more over giving and under receiving do I need to do? Like, are you kidding me? So, that's not a conversation that for me, like, when I hear people talk about, like, "I just wanna be of service, I wanna do X, Y, and Z," ugh, that makes my human just not feel so great because there's a level of, like, just for me, like, the indentured servant aspect of then overgiving and possibly under receiving and then you're doing it, it's this conditioned nature that's really put out there. It's better to give than receive. Why can't you give and receive and be in a balanced nature of it? Like, what? So, for me, I had to really, in my 20s, I went through a whole process of deconstructing from religion, from Catholicism, and what do I believe, what resonates with me. And I went on that whole journey in my early 20s. Um, and it was eye opening in a lot of ways. It was difficult in some ways, uh, because in some ways it would just be easier to stay asleep and just keep regurgitating and chirping what had been fed from that schooling aspect and also just in terms of from then family and just continue just chirping the same thing and not processing like, wait, what does this really mean? How is this affecting me? Is this really true? Is this really true? Seriously? Like, God, is that really true? It's better to give than receive. Like, what? Like, who came up with that? And then everybody's just unconsciously saying it and then shaking their heads, yes, like, that's right. Like, what? Do you know how that's affecting you then that you're saying that? So yeah, I deconstructed from that in my 20s and which then, led me even more into energy work. I've been doing things since I was a kid, but it really led me to study it as an adult. Um, and then also looking at then, I think, your relationship then with prosperity, financial flow, and your pattern of exchange. Like, what is that like? Um, really taking time to just think about that and, journal. Oversoul Sahariel shares this. Overgiving is not measured only by quantity. So okay. Overgiving is not measured only by quantity. It is measured by truth. When giving moves beyond coherence and begins to cost the self, its steadiness, its dignity, nourishment, or balance, the exchange has already shifted. Under receiving is not only the absence of return, it is the repeated experience of being insufficiently met while continuing to extend. Where this becomes normalized, the field begins to organize around depletion. The restoration begins when the pattern is named clearly and the being no longer calls imbalance love. That's the end of the message. Wow. So take some time with this, my friends. And let's then talk about what healing begins to look like. Healing begins with recognition. It begins by noticing where you're giving from truth and where you're giving from compulsion. And when we're talking about truth, we're talking about light truth. It begins by noticing where you're giving from light truth and where you're giving, and where you're giving from compulsion. It's that self realization, it's that recognition. It's that if you do dowsing work, it's that investigation. It's that reflection. So it begins by noticing where your life is generally reciprocal and where it is quietly overdrawn. It begins by noticing how your body feels in certain exchanges. Do you feel nourished? Do you feel respected? Do you feel at ease? Do you feel met? Or do you feel drained, tight, obligated, resentful, unseen, or energetically diminished? I'm gonna also add a caveat with all of this though, because sometimes too, though, people can be in defense mode and they can be like, I was disrespected, or I didn't feel at ease, or I didn't feel nourished. And it could have been because there's something that's coming up for you to clear, or you could be looking through non beneficial data from the eyes and you could be always feeling like you're not being respected, and so that's where then the self-awareness really comes in, because and then it's also just not clear cut. There's many aspects of it, and you have to then untangle it and look at the accountability and the responsibility of self, and then the maturity of self as well, and not making it so black and white that that person's doing X, Y, and Z and being so quick to blame the other person. It's really about like what's happening in my experience. Is there responsibility that I need to take? Is there something I need to learn and grow from? And then, doing the clearing and the shifting and then supporting the human to mature in its emotional and mental, capacities. So then with it, healing also begins when you stop treating imbalance as normal simply because it has been familiar. That's a big one. We, even though every day is a new experience or possibility for us, humans get so caught in just wanting it to be familiar and the same as every day. So it's so interesting when you think about Groundhog's Day, where, Groundhog's Day, the movie, where every day, the main character was like in the same scenario. And it's like, how do I get out of it? Yet humans are so comfortable with that, but yet they also want things to change and progress. It's so, the contradiction is so great. Um, so that's what you have to work with the human though, and let the human become comfortable, and then recognizing if there's any imbalances that it's okay. We can work with the nervous system. We can ask for it to clear and then shift and have a nervous system reset. You're safe. You can reground. And the guides are very clear that this is not about becoming hardened or ungenerous. You can still be generous and have healthy boundaries. This is about restoring clean giving and safe receiving. It is about letting generosity become coherent again. It is about allowing support and having reciprocal flow and fair exchange to belong in your life too. So, my friends, if you recognize yourself in this pattern, you are not alone. Many people have lived inside overgiving and under receiving for so long that it's felt like personality, role, duty, or love. But naming it is powerful, because once the pattern is seen, it can begin to change. Once the imbalance is named, new choices can become possible. New boundaries can become possible. New forms of support can become possible. New standards of being able to receive in terms of the reciprocal nature of giving and receiving can become possible. Ova Sohariel shares this: let the hidden cost be seen. Let the old exchange be named. Let the body no longer call depletion devotion. Let the heart no longer call absence enough. Let giving return to coherence. Let receiving return to safety. Let mutuality become imaginable again. And that's the end of that message. Okay, friends. So if this topic resonates and you want to go further, There will be eventually a mini dowsing session for overgiving and under receiving, the hidden cost of imbalance exchange inside the Inspiring You All Access tier, my Inspiring You Patreon All Access tier. The link will be in the show notes. And if you want to explore this pattern at an even deeper level, I invite you into my 3-part harmonic abundance crystalline dowsing series that is now available also in my Inspiring You All Access tier and you'll find the link also in the show notes. So, this series, the 3-part harmonic abundance crystalline dowsing series, the series is not surface level manifestation work. It is multidimensional clearing and recalibration, and that was received through Pure Source. And you work then to help reveal hidden structures around value and exchange, clear inherited scarcity, support a more balanced relationship with receiving to allow the flow of your divine inheritance of abundance that is truly yours by divine right. So again, if you're interested, link will be in the show notes for the Inspiring You All Access Patreon. If you want to just join the Inspiring You Patreon, you can for free. There is a free component where I send out newsletters occasionally, but the deeper sources of resources really are in the Meditate with Me tier and the All Access tier. So the All Access tier also has access to the other tiers, which is the Meditate with Me, which includes 6 energy meditations a month at least, as well as the Reiki box where you can send intentions once a month to be Reiki'd, and then you receive daily Reiki if you wish to. And then in the All Access tier, you not only get access to the 3-part harmonic abundance crystalline dowsing series, but also 2 group dowsings a month, as well as then if you are new to dowsing or want to learn dowsing, the 3-hour workshop, the intro to how to douse, is actually in the all access and available as part of that tier. And there's so many other resources. So check it out if you're interested. All right, y'all, here's the crystalline Reiki blessing. This is from the guides as well. May the places within you that learn to give beyond truth now soften and return to balance. May the reflex to overextend dissolve from your field with gentleness and clarity. May your body remember that support is not something you must earn through depletion. May your nervous system open to the safety of mutuality. May all patterns that confuse self erasure with love begin to release now. May the burden of caring more than your share lift from your heart, your body, and your energetic field. May your giving become coherent, willing, and true. May your receiving become safe, natural, and whole. May relationships, work, and exchanges that cannot meet your truth reveal themselves clearly. May balance support, honest, reciprocal relationships in nature of giving and receiving and nourishing exchange now find you more fully with ease, grace, harmony for the highest good. May your worth no longer be measured by how much you carry for others. May you remember that sacred exchange includes you too. So, my friends, the crystalline Reiki blessing is complete. The field is recalibrating. Mutuality is permitted. Your tone holds. With that, my friends, we are complete for now. Much, much love, my friends. Until soon, and stay inspired.